Have you ever discovered a treasure by chance in your daily life? The short parable in Matthew 13:44 teaches us the surprising truth that treasure is hidden in places we least expect.
The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. Then, in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field.
Historical and cultural background.
To understand how realistic this story was to Jesus' audience, we must understand the background of that time. Historically, Palestine was a geopolitical corridor connecting Mesopotamia and Egypt, making it a constant site of war and looting. In an era without banks or vaults, burying valuables in clay jars was one of the safest ways to protect them from the threats of war or bandits. The problem was that because these treasures were hidden so secretly, they were often left in the ground if the owner died on the battlefield or was taken as a prisoner of war. Therefore, a farmer discovering treasure while plowing a field would have felt like a life-changing event, much like winning the lottery to the listeners of that day. The man in the parable was likely a tenant farmer rather than the landowner. Considering how desperate the lives of the poor were at the time, we cannot easily condemn his choice to buy the field without informing the owner. For a laborer who owned nothing, this unexpected encounter with wealth represented the only possible path toward a life of dignity and freedom in a world of systemic poverty. His frantic rush to liquidate every meager asset he possessed underscores the sheer gravity of his condition, proving that for those at the bottom of society, the kingdom of God is seen as a revolutionary chance to overwrite a destiny of despair.
The relationship between the field and the world.
The most notable detail in this parable is that the man who discovered the treasure did not buy the treasure itself, but rather the field where it was hidden. The early church father Irenaeus interpreted the field as the world and the treasure as Christ himself. This interpretation suggests that the kingdom of God is not a distant future place we go after death, but something that has already invaded our current reality in the form of Christ. Jacques Ellul points out that the person who found the kingdom did not just buy the treasure, but the entire field, the world, where the treasure was hidden. This is a striking declaration that challenges modern Christians who try to confine the gospel to the private realm of individual soul salvation. A faith that believes obtaining the treasure of heaven is enough is an act ignored by both Jesus and the world. Such a perspective is a form of spiritual egoism, viewing this world as something destined to burn away while focusing only on personal salvation. In contrast, the faith that buys the field represents a decisive commitment to reclaim a world once dominated by the logic of Satan or Mammon for the reign of God. By purchasing the field, the believer acknowledges that the secular world is not a place to be shunned, but a sacred territory to be redeemed and reclaimed for God's glory. Therefore, we must realize that our calling is not to simply clutch a ticket to heaven while ignoring the world's decay, but to use our entire existence to purchase and cultivate the very ground we stand on, transforming it into a space where God's justice and peace can finally take root.
Ethical debate and the emphasis on joy.
Critics of this parable often question the morality of the man who hid the treasure and bought the field without telling the owner. However, Jesus did not intend to give a moral lecture through this story. Instead, he focused on the overwhelming joy felt by the one who found the treasure and the resulting decisive action. As Helmut Thielicke noted, the kingdom of God does not come through noble moral education. It is established through the dynamic power of the thrill and moved heart of one who has discovered Christ, a power that transforms the world. Joachim Jeremias also emphasizes that the core of this parable is joy, not ethics. When a great joy that surpasses all measures captures a person, that joy overwhelms the decision-making process and makes the sacrifice of all other possessions seem perfectly natural. Eberhard Zwengel and Joachim Jeremias offer a different perspective on the sacrifice involved. For someone who recognizes the value of the treasure, selling everything is no longer a painful sacrifice or a heavy resolution. It is because the joy of discovery has completely overwhelmed the discoverer's heart. Since the treasure is so precious, disposing of one's possessions becomes a natural and hesitant-free step. Joy has swallowed up duty. This radical joy functions as a spiritual compass, guiding us toward a life of total surrender where the weight of sacrifice is completely dissolved by the light of the prize. What is most required of Christians today is the joy and thrill of discovering Christ. Jacques Ellul criticizes modern evangelism methods for failing to convey this joy by focusing too much on hell, judgment, and fear. The message we must deliver to the world is not curse, condemnation, or judgment, but the irresistible value of the kingdom of God. The greatest problem for modern Christians is falling into a state of stagnation, taking Christ and the gospel of salvation for granted without any sense of gratitude or emotion. They are like people who do not dance when the flute is played, or cry when a dirge is sung.
The stumbling block that reveals treasure.
Helmut Thielicke interprets this field as our lives and argues that treasure is hidden within the stumbling blocks of daily existence. When a farmer encounters a hard rock that strikes his plow, he might complain about the frustrating obstacle. However, that very barrier blocking his path might actually be the treasure chest waiting to be found. According to Joachim Jeremias, the protagonist of this parable is a poor tenant farmer who does not even own his own land. While plowing someone else's field, he hears the sound of his plow hitting a jar in the ground and discovers the treasure. This suggests that the kingdom of God does not begin in a magnificent temple, but in the lowest and most miserable points of life, such as the painful moments when the plow gets stuck on a rock. The very hardships we wish to avoid are often the precise locations where God has placed the keys to his kingdom, waiting for our perseverance to uncover them. Ultimately, this parable asks us whether we will lose hope before the frustrating obstacles that stop our life's plow, or if we will break through the hard shell of misfortune to reach the eternal treasure hidden within. The kingdom of God is the greatest gift delivered to us, wrapped in the rough packaging of suffering.
Conclusion: 3 required attitudes of life.
In conclusion, this parable calls us to adopt 3 attitudes in life. First, the kingdom of God is here in our current reality. It is not a future place to visit after death, but a treasure God has hidden within the busyness of today and our unexpected hardships. We need the insight to find God's presence within our reality rather than trying to escape it. Second, our priorities must change naturally. Someone who has realized the value of the treasure does not force themselves to abandon the world. Rather, they lightheartedly let go of previous things because they have found something far more precious. A transformation must occur where the values of the kingdom, love, justice, and mercy, become the center of life through joy. Third, we must cultivate the field of the world with joy and gratitude. A Christian is not someone who leaves the world, but someone who enters it to cultivate it faithfully. Even under harsh conditions, when we work with the dignity and integrity of a follower of Christ, we will discover the kingdom of God in the very field where we stand. That life of joy itself will become the most powerful form of evangelism, proving the power of the gospel to the world.
Logos Global Academy currently streams in 11 languages and is expanding to over 20 languages to reach every corner of the globe. Please subscribe and become a member to empower this massive global mission. Thank you so much.